In the autumn of 1973, Arthur Melling, a volunteer at the Kent County Archive, was sorting through a crate of discarded textiles salvaged from a deconsecrated chapel near the village of Ashmere. Among the folded surplices and torn communion cloths, he found a small bundle wrapped tightly in yellowed lace. Inside was a square of linen, hand-stitched in faded red thread. The embroidery was crude, uneven, likely done by a shaking hand. It bore a single name, M.M. Cartwright. There were no dates, no symbols, no parish seals. Just the name fraying at the edges, the middle letters sagging as if interrupted mid-stitch. Arthur assumed it was a forgotten keepsake, something left behind during the dismantling of Langley House, an old estate that had served various charitable roles over the decades, most notably as a 19th century institution for morally displaced women according to county records. But Langley had been closed for decades, and few spoke of it. Curious, Arthur made note of the name and brought the cloth home. That night under the kitchen lamp he examined the stitching more closely. The thread had snapped between the W and the R, not frayed from time, but sheared abruptly. He couldn't explain why it unsettled him, only that it didn't feel like the cloth had been forgotten. It felt hidden. The following week he searched the county census archive's marriage register's burial plots. No Margaret Mary or Martha Cartwright matching the initials lived in Ashmere during Langley's operation. In fact, no M.M. Cartwright appeared anywhere in Kent's local records between 1880 and 1910. But Langley House was active then. It had opened in 1881 as a refuge for women of difficult moral standing following the social upheaval after the Boer War and shifting domestic roles under the British Empire. The building had been privately funded, operated by a board of clerics and physicians. Its public mission was charitable. Its interior life was undocumented. There were whispers, of course, of women who entered and were never seen again, of a third-floor wing sealed in 1902. But there was never an inquiry, no front-page scandal, just silence. The kind of silence history depends on. Arthur pressed the linen flat between the pages of his notebook and wrote 4 words above the name. Who was she really? He didn't know then that the answer would take him into the buried records of an institution built on erasure, and that the cloth he held might be the only surviving trace of a woman who had spent her final days not trying to be remembered, but desperately trying not to be forgotten. Langley House stood alone at the edge of Ashmere Wood, a 3-story Georgian manor hemmed in by yew trees and persistent fog. Locals called it the House of Return, but no one agreed on what or who was supposed to return. Originally built in 1826 for a minor land baron, the estate had passed quietly into the hands of the Church of England in 1879, after a series of undisclosed financial mishandlings. By 1881, Langley had been repurposed as a private, charitable refuge under the direction of Reverend Jeremiah Langley, a man known for his rigid sermons and for his fondness for restorative silence. He gave the house his name, his doctrine, and a reputation that lingered long after the roof had caved in. Official records state that Langley's Asylum for refugee women was established to rehabilitate women of compromised virtue, a term left deliberately undefined. Some had escaped brothels. Others had been cast out by family for illegitimate pregnancies, disobedience, or mental illness. A few were war widows with no pensions. All were women who no longer fit where society had placed them. Langley was not publicly funded. It operated under a hybrid model, part religious mission, part vocational school. Women entered voluntarily, though often with nowhere else to go. They received training in laundry stitching and basic nursing. In return, they surrendered all correspondence rights, forfeited their surnames, and committed to a minimum of 3 seasons of spiritual renewal, which could be extended at the discretion of the board. New arrivals were stripped of personal items, issued uniforms with identifying numbers, and referred to by their given names, only if that. In some cases, even the first name was replaced with a code. There are few photographs of Langley's early years. Most were destroyed in a fire in 1922 or so, the church claimed. But one image survives locked in the Kent Archive's restricted collection. It shows 8 women in identical dark gowns seated in a row before the stone steps. Their faces are blurred not from motion, but because each has been deliberately scratched out. Only the figure at the back, presumed to be Reverend Langley himself, remains intact. His right hand is resting on a girl's shoulder. Langley wrote often about his philosophy of transformative quiet. He believed noise was a symptom of inner chaos, and that true redemption required the complete suppression of self. In a sermon dated June 4, 1883, he preached, "The lost woman must be returned not to her place, but to her purpose. And she must return in silence. For only in silence can the soul be stitched anew." Langley's policies went largely unchallenged. The institution fell just outside government oversight, and the women inside were considered both unfit and unimportant by public standards. No one asked what became of them once they arrived. No one questioned why some never left. Langley House operated without interruption for 34 years. Then, in 1915, it was closed without explanation. The church filed a brief statement citing infrastructure decay and changing priorities. The staff dispersed. The patients, if they were still called that, were transferred to unknown locations. No formal audit was conducted. The ledgers stopped mid-line. Langley House remained locked until its partial demolition in 1934. The only known item to survive from its operational years a piece of cloth, stitched by a hand history tried to erase. According to a surviving policy booklet dated 1887, the arrival process at Langley House followed a strict series of steps referred to as the Protocol of Return. It was not framed as admission, nor acceptance, nor rescue. It was a return, though, to what, or from where, was never made clear. The protocol began with an inspection. New residents, referred to only as entrants, were escorted through the rear servants' gate. They were told not to speak. Personal items were collected, cataloged, and locked in a cabinet marked Transition. Most of these possessions were never returned. Clothing was burned, jewelry melted, letters discarded unread. Each entrant was assigned a numbered frock, a linen head cover, and a cot in the communal dormitory on the second floor. They were not told how long they would stay. The booklet described this uncertainty as an essential condition for the severing of worldly ties. During the first 7 days, entrants were to maintain complete silence. They were allowed neither to write nor to read, except for devotional texts pre-selected by the clergy. Any attempt at spoken word, according to the ledger, resulted in isolation and recalibration. By day, women labored in the laundry wing or sewing hall, their work referred to in internal records as acts of undoing. By night, they attended reflection hours in the chapel, a narrow vaulted room with no windows, and a raised pulpit shaped like a confessional booth. The sessions were not optional. 3 times a week, entrants met with a designated overseer, a woman often referred to in ledgers only as Madame. Her full name was never formally recorded. Survivors from nearby villages later referred to her as Madame Fellbridge, though no record of her ordination or employment exists in church archives. According to testimony recorded in a 1948 private interview with a former groundskeeper, Madame Fellbridge conducted moral inventory sessions with new entrants in the western wing. That wing had no heating and was eventually sealed off. These sessions were described as quiet but lasting. Residents were never permitted beyond the 2nd floor. The 3rd floor, said to be used for storage, was kept permanently locked. A single staircase led up to it. According to one note found in the 1909 maintenance log, the door to that floor was reinforced in iron following an incident in March. No incident report was filed. Every measure taken during the arrival protocol was meant to erase the woman who entered and manufacture the woman Langley deemed fit to remain. Most were never seen in public again. There are no graduation records, no placement logs, only line items marked departure without destinations. Langley did not rehabilitate. Langley absorbed. And the longer a woman stayed, the less likely she was to ever be called by her name again. Hidden at the eastern end of Langley's main corridor was a narrow doorway, framed in ash wood, leading to a chamber known in internal documents as the reflection suite. Among staff, it was simply called the quiet room. There are no architectural plans that mention it. The door doesn't appear on the estate's 1881 floor sketches. But in 1975, during a preliminary site mapping for redevelopment, surveyors discovered a bricked-over recess behind the eastern stairwell. Its proportions matched precisely with eyewitness accounts recorded decades earlier. The quiet room was not designed for prayer. It held a single chair bolted to the floor, its arms scarred with deep indentations. There were no windows, no bookshelf, no religious icons. In one corner stood a narrow table and a glass oil lamp suspended from a rusted hook. The walls were reinforced in uneven stone, suggesting the space may have existed even before Langley's conversion into an institution. No official documentation described its purpose directly. But the private ledger of Reverend Langley, recovered from a locked drawer in a nearby chapel after his death, includes chilling references to sessions of imposed silence and spiritual estrangement by design. One passage reads, "The Lord too wandered 40 days without speech, bearing solitude in his marrow." In that image, they must be unmade. The quiet room was not punitive in the way prisons were. It did not beat starve or chain. It withdrew. The women placed there were denied not only speech but presence. They were not spoken to, not looked at, not referred to by name. Their food was slipped in without acknowledgement. Their return to dormitory life, if it occurred, was unannounced. What happened inside was meant to unravel them. A single letter, believed to have been smuggled from Langley in 1903, describes the experience of a former resident only as an erasure you feel in your teeth. The author mentions the flicker of a mirror, a voice reciting a passage she did not recognize, and the overwhelming weight of not knowing how long she had been forgotten. There were no clocks inside the quiet room. There was no record of how long each woman remained there. But in the wall cavity discovered by the 1975 team beneath layers of plaster and wood rot, surveyors found 3 linen name tags. Each bore only initials. The stitching was uneven. The thread had faded, but one remained partially intact, MMC. It matched the cloth Arthur Melling had found 2 years earlier. It was not proof. But it was something worse, a suggestion that the only traces of these women, these vanished lives, were not their voices, not their deeds, not their graves, but the small broken threads of names they tried to leave behind. The moral foundation of Langley House was not built on compassion. It was constructed on a theology of substitution, a belief that personal suffering could be reshaped into spiritual value only if a woman relinquished her identity completely. This belief system was formalized in a document titled The Doctrine of Return, attributed to Reverend Jeremiah Langley in 1882. Though not distributed publicly, a handwritten copy was discovered in 1976 behind a false panel in the pulpit lectern wrapped in a black ribbon. The doctrine opened with a single line, "A woman lost in body may yet be recovered in soul if she consents to die without dying." Langley's philosophy separated the self into 3 parts: the flesh, the voice, and the name. The flesh could be cleansed. The voice could be silenced, but the name, he argued, must be sacrificed. According to his writings, redemption could only occur if the woman ceased to be the person who entered. Her history, her attachments, her former desires had to be surrendered not for healing, but for replacement. She would not be restored. She would be reformed in the image Langley called the devoted. The text mandated that each resident undergo a ritual unnaming within their first 30 days. During this process, overseen by Madame Felbridge and a second cleric, the woman would state her birth name once in full, and then watch it be recorded in a book that would never be shown to her again. Thereafter, she was to respond only to her designated number, or the title Sister. She could not refer to her past nor speak of outside people. The penalty for non-compliance was extension of silence or removal to the 3rd level. Most chillingly, the doctrine prescribed a system of internal confession. Instead of confessionals, Langley encouraged residents to write letters to their former selves and then destroy them as an act of release. Dozens of these partial letters, scorched and torn, were later found buried behind the chapel hearth. They contain no names. Only fragments. I tried to speak once, but they told me my tongue had not yet been earned. The quiet here is not silence. It is subtraction. I buried my name inside the floorboards. It still screams. The doctrine described this suffering not as cruelty but as sacrifice. The goal was not to punish but to cleanse by obliteration. Langley believed a soul could be made holy through absence, and at Langley House absence was enforced in every breath, every hallway, every erased record. It is unclear how many women completed the doctrine's full cycle. Langley's notes imply that very few did. Most either disappeared into the system or never returned at all. The third floor of Langley House did not appear on any official architectural plans after 1894. No fire escape reached it. The windows were shuttered from within and nailed shut. Staff referred to it only in passing, if at all, as the upper ward, but none of the medical records mention patient treatment above the second level. Yet, multiple internal memos recovered from church correspondence in the 1970s refer cryptically to transfers to the third, often in the context of behavioral noncompliance. One note, dated September 1901, from Madame Felbridge to Reverend Langley reads, "Sister 23 has begun reciting her birth name in her sleep. I recommend she be relocated to the third before the others over here." By 1902, the third floor was sealed entirely. The hallway door leading up was reinforced with an iron bracket, and a hand-carved plaque long since removed was said to have hung above it, bearing only the word closure. Rumors surrounding the third floor were preserved mostly through oral history. Former groundskeeper Daniel Hawes, who spoke reluctantly to local journalist Grace Everly in 1968, described hearing metal dragging across wood sometimes at night after Madame's rounds. He was never permitted to go up. He claimed once to have seen Reverend Langley ascending the stairwell holding a bundle wrapped in black cloth. The 1975 architectural survey confirmed a large attic-level space spanning the entire north wing of the house. Beneath layers of dust and rotted beams, investigators found a series of iron bed frames nailed to the floor, each with restraints still fastened at the corners. The walls had been painted white, but beneath the peeling surface initials were scratched into the plaster, some deep, some faint. One set appeared repeatedly MMC. No lighting remained. Only rusted sconces along the walls and a narrow grated window that had been boarded from the inside. What disturbed the investigators most wasn't the evidence of confinement, it was the absence of exit. No stairwell descended from the far end of the corridor, no ladder, no fire access. A single locked door led to a crawlspace filled with scorched timbers and debris, as if something had once been burned and buried within the walls. The survey was halted. The team reported unsafe structural conditions and filed no formal complaint. But one anonymous member left behind a note in the margin of their field log. The third floor wasn't closed because it was damaged. It was damaged to keep it closed. What happened to the women sent there remains undocumented. There are no records of their release, no burial logs in parish cemeteries, no mention of deaths, though a missing persons report filed by a local physician in 1904 refers to a patient last seen transported to Langley under ecclesial discretion, name withheld. The third floor was not forgotten. It was buried. And in that burial, Langley House cemented its legacy not as a refuge, but as a place where women vanished, and the silence was written into stone. In 1992, during a partial restoration project of the Langley House Chapel, commissioned for historical preservation, a construction worker uncovered a hollow behind the choir wall. Inside, wrapped in a waxed cloth and sealed with 3 pins, lay a journal, thin, hand-bound with pages water-damaged but intact. The first page bore no full name, only a date, July 1899, and a mark C. The writing was steady, unadorned. Unlike the embellished calligraphy of official ledgers, this hand was plain urgent, and unlike the doctrine of return, this text made no claims of purity. It was simply a record kept by a woman who had once been obedient and had begun to see. Her entries were not dated after the first, but the sequence suggested months of observation. She refers to herself only as Sister Catherine, though it becomes clear that was not her real name. She had been brought to Langley in winter. Her father had died in debt. Her aunt had arranged her transfer, calling it a place of second chances. Catherine believed it. For the first 5 weeks she followed the rules. She remained silent. She folded linen. She wrote letters to her old self and burned them. But she began to notice things others wouldn't say aloud. In one entry she wrote, "Sister 12 does not dream anymore." She stares at the ceiling and mouths numbers. Yesterday she mouthed mine. In another, the chapel pews are uneven. I counted 17. There are 18 residents. One always kneels behind the door. She noticed the quiet room before anyone told her of it. The girls who went in returned to pale quiet in a new way, emptied, not just silenced. Some had bandages around their wrists. Others never returned at all. She began marking the departures in secret, a stitch on the inside of her sleeve. By spring, her sleeve had 13. Then came a turning point. She was assigned laundry duty in the North Wing. While sorting frocks, she discovered one with initials inside MMC. They had been unpicked, but not completely. Whoever wore it had tried to erase her name, but stopped short. Catherine began listening at night. The walls creaked in patterns. She memorized footsteps, counted shadows. She learned to distinguish the sound of keys from the rustle of robes. She was not disobedient. She was observing. In her final entries, she began to describe the third staircase, one not listed in the house map, accessed through a panel behind the altar. She believed this led to the third floor, though she had never seen it. Her final note read, "If they send me, I will remember. I will count. I will keep my name stitched beneath my skin. They cannot unmake what is already written." The journal ends there. There are no further entries. No record of a Catherine among the released. But the stitching on the recovered cloth MMC was done in a thread that matched her sleeve. She may not have escaped, but she recorded enough that others decades later could begin to see what Langley tried so hard to hide. In 1911, a private letter was sent from the office of Bishop Thomas Everton of Southwark to the Diocesan Committee for Ecclesiastical Oversight. It was never formally archived. The letter resurfaced only in 1986 during a private estate sale of church documents in Surrey. The envelope was yellowed, unsealed. The letter inside bore the bishop's seal and signature. It was marked confidential. The content did not concern theological instruction or institutional expansion. It concerned Langley House, specifically an incident of concern reported to his office by a young priest who had conducted temporary chaplaincy at the asylum. The priest's name was withheld. But according to Everton's account, the man had served at Langley for 6 weeks. During that time, he was granted no access to the upper floors, nor to the residents outside chapel hours. His sermons were pre-written and handed to him by Madame Felbridge. He was forbidden from making eye contact with the women in the pews. He did so anyway. One woman, identified only as Sister 9, had a tremor in her hands. During communion, she mouthed a word behind the chalice. The priest recognized it. It was his sister's name. He attempted to inquire further, but was warned privately by Madame Felbridge that personal recognition was the first step toward disorder. He was then reassigned to clerical duties off-site. Bishop Everton described the priest's account as deeply troubling, and went on to express concern over Langley's doctrine of intentional anonymity, its refusal to allow external inspection and its record-keeping practices, which he deemed inconsistent with the diocesan norms. Yet no investigation was ordered. The bishop closed his letter with the following: "I am aware that Langley provides a service the church has long preferred to keep out of view. But if even one of these women remains without voice, then our silence becomes complicity." There is no record of a reply. 3 months after the letter was written, Bishop Everton resigned without public explanation. He relocated to Dorset and lived in seclusion until his death in 1924. Langley House continued operations for 12 more years. The letter was never cited in church reports, nor was it referenced in any official review of the institution. But its very existence offers proof of what so many had long suspected, that those in power knew something was wrong and chose not to intervene. Silence, once again, was the mechanism, and behind that silence were names, not erased, but ignored. On the night of February 17, 1923, a fire broke out in the northern wing of Langley House. Official reports described it as an electrical fault, though the asylum's lighting was almost entirely gas-operated. The fire began shortly after midnight, spreading rapidly across the upper floor. By the time the village fire brigade arrived, the third floor was engulfed. No deaths were recorded, no injuries reported, but the entire third floor, long sealed, undocumented, was destroyed. The incident was formally described as a structural loss with no human cost. Yet, within days, contractors arrived from London hired not to restore but to demolish. The north wing was pulled down to its foundation. All debris was removed under private security escort. The land was leveled, paved with limestone, and designated a reflection courtyard in public plans. What was lost in the fire has never been recovered, but what survived raises deeper questions. In 1976, while surveying beneath the southern staircase for moisture damage, engineers discovered a bundle sealed in a tin box, scorched but intact. Inside were fragments of burnt paper remnants of linen and a single hair comb engraved with initials barely visible under char. MMC, the same initials found in the quiet room wall, the same as the stitched gown, the same as Sister Catherine's markings. Local historian Elsie Murdoch, who reviewed the fire logs and insurance claims, found multiple irregularities. The timing of the fire coincided with a rare gap in external inspections. The safety certificates had expired just weeks before. No third-party electrical audit was ever filed. Most damningly, the inventory of the North Wing's contents listed only furniture and linens. No mention of restraints, no mention of medical equipment, no mention of residents. Yet, oral accounts passed down through the village speak of figures seen at the upper windows. During the blaze, silent figures unmoving. The records deny this. The church issued no further comment. The demolition, when complete, effectively erased the last physical evidence of the third floor, and with it the last trace of those who may have died there not in flames, but in isolation long before the fire began. Whether the fire was accident or intention remains unproven, but its timing was convenient, and what it erased cannot be extinguished by ash, because a name scratched in stone or stitched beneath a sleeve does not burn easily, especially when it has already survived silence. In 1958, a former clerk named Samuel Denby came forward during a town heritage interview about Langley House. At the time, Denby was 82 and living in a care home near Portsmouth. His recollections were scattered, interrupted by memory loss. But one statement endured. He said, "They were not numbers. I wrote their names, every one of them. I wasn't supposed to, but I did." Denby had served as a junior transcriptionist at Langley from 1897 to 1901. His task officially was to copy doctrine notes and standard admissions forms. But Denby confessed to keeping a second ledger, one that listed the birth names of women admitted to the asylum, paired with the sister numbers they were assigned. He hid the book in the false bottom of his desk drawer. When he left Langley quietly after refusing to redact a girl's surname from her intake form, he took the ledger with him. For decades, the book remained locked in a trunk in his attic. He told no one. But in the final years of his life, haunted by what he described as unfinished duty, he dictated the names he remembered to a local librarian who transcribed them by hand. Only 17 names could be verified. But those names cross-referenced with baptismal and census records match the identities of girls officially listed as relocated by the church between 1898 and 1902. None of them appear in burial records, none appear in marriage ledgers, and none ever returned home. Denby wept during the recording. He recalled one girl, Sarah Hemsworth, aged 15, who had been brought in by her uncle after speaking out about a family disgrace. She became Sister 11. Her hair was cut. She was not allowed to speak for the first 60 days. Denby remembered her, not because of her story, but because she had asked before the unnaming ceremony if he would remember her name for her. "Write it down," she said, "just once. So I know I was real." He did. The original ledger was never recovered. Denby claimed it had been lost during a house fire in 1944, But his dictated list survived, and from that list came the first public memorial to the women of Langley House, commissioned in 1999, installed on the site of the demolished North Wing. The plaque does not accuse, it only names. And sometimes that is the most radical act of all. In 2003, during a planned refurbishment of the Langley Chapel's original oak flooring, a maintenance crew uncovered a sealed compartment beneath the choir risers hidden under 3 layers of mismatched planks. Inside was a wooden box hand-carved wrapped in a fragment of what appeared to be ecclesiastical vestment. The box had no lock, only a recessed groove. It opened without force. Inside were 32 folded notes, yellowed and curled at the corners. Each was marked with a number. Sister 3, Sister 7, Sister 19, Sister 23. The writing varied in hand and tone. Some were prayers. Others were fragmented memories, barely coherent. A few were written in what appeared to be children's script, but they all shared a common plea remembrance. One read, "If I am not called by my name again, let this paper be my voice." Another, she bled for 3 days after the doctor's visit. No one changed the sheets. Some notes described the quiet room. Others mentioned the 3rd floor. One bore only a list of words: bread, salt, Sunday, needle, cold, each word followed by a tick mark. They were not letters. They were records etched by hand in secret, then hidden. The box had no markings to indicate who gathered the notes or hid them. But woven into the cloth that wrapped it was a monogram in fading thread C, the same initial that appeared in Sister Catherine's journal. The same woman who once wrote, "I will remember." The sealed box proved she had done more than remember. She had preserved. Archivists later verified that the handwriting on at least 6 of the notes matched samples from parish school admissions records. Girls from Kent, Devon, and Middlesex, all admitted between 1892 and 1905, all reported relocated or committed by family clergy. None had known graves. The contents of the box were catalogued and stored in the National Records Archive under restricted access. A redacted version was later included in the 2011 Parliamentary Inquiry into Historical Abuse in Ecclesiastical Institutions. The report cited Langley House only once, under a footnote referencing sites of interest pending formal designation. But the box beneath the floorboards spoke more clearly than any government report. It said, "We were here. We knew what was happening, and we tried to leave a trace." That trace, hidden under decades of silence, had survived, not because anyone protected it, but because those who were silenced refused to let their truth end with them. Between 1935 and 1940, Langley House began its final transformation from an active institution to a charitable residence for elderly sisters. The rebranding was swift and administrative. Dozens of files were consolidated, many destroyed under the justification of non-relevant holdings. Church directories were rewritten. Census entries quietly shifted designations. Where once it read Asylum, it now read Retreat. This was not correction, it was erasure. Parish newsletters from the 1940s present Langley as a model of ecclesiastical charity, a haven for aging women, a site of quiet reflection and long service. Photographs published in the Diocesan Bulletin show neatly tended gardens, smiles frozen in profile. Not a single image includes the north wing or the 3rd floor. It was during this period that patient records were systematically overwritten. Cross-referencing parish registries with Family Archives historian Dr. Margaret Ellis uncovered nearly 24 examples of name substitution. Girls who had been admitted to Langley between 1888 and 1915 appeared in diocesan records as having died in childhood or been sent overseas. In 2 cases, baptismal names were reassigned to younger siblings without explanation. One mother's journal discovered in a trunk in East Sussex described receiving a letter in 1903 that her daughter Marianne had died from fever abroad. The family grieved for decades. In 1999, her great-granddaughter discovered that Marianne's name had been signed into Langley under Sister 18 3 months after the date of supposed death. There was no death certificate, no body returned, only a gap. A silence constructed on paper more enduring than any locked room. And yet small cracks remained. Among the handwritten notes in Sister Catherine's journal were faint references to birthplaces details never recorded officially, but precise enough to connect girls with families long told they had vanished. In one margin, Catherine listed 4 towns and a surname. All 4 matched missing person notices from 1897. These records, restored line by line through private research and survivor testimony, have formed the foundation for what legal scholars now call restorative identification. A process not of exhumation but of remembering, because Langley didn't only take names from the girls who entered, it gave false ones to the world, and in doing so it crafted a history that suited the institution's needs, orderly, contained quiet. But behind the quiet was movement. Behind the closed ledgers were hands still writing. And behind the rewritten records were people who refused to be buried under someone else's version of the truth. In 1962, a woman named Evelyn Hart walked into the vestry of St. Bridget's Parish in Norfolk asking for access to Langley House. She was 71 years old. Her request was denied. The building by then had been converted into private storage for the diocese. She was told there was nothing to see, no residence, no records, no function. She disagreed. Evelyn had been committed to Langley in 1905. Her intake form listed her as Sister 12, age 14, admitted under moral distress following the death of a dependent. The dependent had been her stillborn child. The child's father, her employer, had signed the admission form. Evelyn remained at Langley for 7 years. No official record exists of her discharge. But according to her own written account found in a family file decades later, she escaped during a delivery run in 1912. She walked for 2 nights, slept in a barn, and was taken in by a family who never asked where she had come from. She never married. She never reported the asylum. She never spoke her sister number aloud. Until 1962. She came back not to reclaim something but to confirm it had existed. The courtyard was smaller than she remembered. The chapel doors sealed. The 3rd-floor windows bricked over. She walked the perimeter. Stood in silence for nearly an hour. Then she left. 2 years later, Evelyn gave a single interview to a local historian compiling a study on Norfolk institutions. She refused to be photographed, but allowed her voice to be recorded. When asked why she had returned, she replied, "Because when no one else says your name, you have to go find the place where you lost it." Her story was dismissed for years as anecdote unverified, unprovable. Then, in 2018, a private archive released the original Langley meal ledger from 1905. On the July page, one line had been crossed out in ink but was still faintly visible under ultraviolet scan. Hart E. Sister 12. No bread on Sunday. It was real. She had been there. She came back not for justice but for presence. Not to expose, but to remember. And by doing so, she became the only named survivor of Langley known to have returned, not as a sister, but as a woman. In 2011, the British government launched a formal inquiry into historical abuse within religious institutions. Dozens of sites were listed. Langley House appeared only once in a footnote under auxiliary ecclesiastical properties inactive. No testimony from survivors was included. No victims were named. And no official statement addressed the system that had enabled the asylum to operate for over 60 years without external oversight. When the inquiry closed in 2014, its final report cited a lack of records as the reason Langley was not investigated further. The fire of 1923 was noted. So was the demolition. It concluded that insufficient material evidence remains to pursue conclusive findings. But material was not the only evidence. Evelyn Hart's account had already circulated among academics. Samuel Denby's list had been authenticated by independent genealogists. The sealed box beneath the choir had been catalogued and preserved. Still, Langley was omitted. No apology was issued. No representative from the church responded to requests for comment. Dr. Margaret Ellis, who had compiled decades of research, submitted a 170-page supplement. Only the first 3 pages were cited. The rest were archived without public access. Behind closed doors, her team was told Langley does not meet the threshold. When the report was released to the public, protesters gathered outside the diocesan offices in Norwich, holding signs with the names of the 17 girls from Denby's list. No cameras arrived, no coverage followed. In the months that followed, 2 more names were added, drawn from birth registries, unclaimed baptismal entries, and records of disappearance that matched Langley's years of operation. A private memorial service was held near the former North Wing, now a paved lot behind a church-run hostel. 30 candles were lit. Only one bore a name spoken aloud. The rest remained initials. To this day, the inquiry remains the only official national investigation into institutional abuse in which Langley House was mentioned and simultaneously erased. History was acknowledged, but not heard. The truth was outlined, but not named, and without names, silence continues. The 3rd floor of Langley House was sealed in 1923 after a fire consumed the eastern wing. Official reports cited faulty wiring, but no damage was ever found on the lower levels. Only the attic and the rooms beneath it were affected. Firemen reported something else. In their testimony, archived but never released publicly, 2 responders noted the presence of small cots bolted into the floor, rusted basins, a narrow hallway lined with hooks, and in the farthest chamber walls covered with white muslin. There were no windows, and no exit but the stairwell they had climbed. The flames had blackened the ceiling, but the lower walls remained untouched, pale, quiet, and still. The fire did not spread further, as if it had known where to stop. The final room was demolished 5 years later. No blueprints were retained. Only a single photograph remains misfiled in a municipal archive and rediscovered in 2006 by a doctoral student researching ecclesiastical housing. It shows a crumbling corridor, brick dust falling through fractured beams. At the end of the corridor is a door half open, revealing nothing. There are no names attached to that image, but those who've studied it recognize the architecture described in the sealed box notes: the tally marks, the salt, the silence. That final room was not an accident of construction. It was built for forgetting, but forgetting has failed. Over the last 2 decades, more pieces have surfaced. Letters hidden in hymnals, threads sewn into the hems of robes, handwriting beneath chipped paint. Not revelations, not even confessions, just presence. The church has never issued a statement. The inquiry never reopened. But the story has not ended, because some histories do not wait for permission to be told. Some names do not require ink to endure. They endure in the cracks between official narratives, in the spaces where records were meant to erase, in the breath between sister and self. Langley House no longer stands. The chapel was razed, the stone was sold. And yet every year, on the anniversary of the fire, someone leaves a white scrap of linen near the site. No note, no candle, just fabric, etched with a name, folded in silence.